Okay, it's 2 o'clock, and our next committee meeting today is the Public Service Committee. Those committee members are Kamer, McKittrick, DeShazier, Bolden, and Lombardo. We do have all committee members present whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'd like to call the public service meeting to order, please. All members are present, and we do have minutes to approve from our last meeting from last year.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for the minutes. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thank you. We do have one piece in front of us today, and since I'm not in council chambers, I'm asking Sarah if she could read that in, please.
Sure. Item number 9 is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or his designee to enter into an agreement or agreements with Premier Truck Sales and Rental, Inc. without the formality of publicly advertising for bids for the lease of 26 Packer trucks over a 36-month period and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Sarah. And we do have our Service Director, Chris Luddle, with us. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. Yes, this legislation before you will allow us to enter an agreement for a lease of 22 sidearm Packer loaders and 4 rear loader vehicles. Currently, we own all our rolling stock in the sanitation division. Most of our, or majority of our stock is 2013 models. We have a few that were purchased in 2018, and then we did purchase 4 last year in 2024. We are going to sell all our older stock. We have looked at a couple websites, and we have sold equipment before on govdeals.com. But some of our aging stock is really beyond its useful life. So we've done this in street cleaning where we've leased equipment versus outright purchases. And industry standard is about 4 years on equipment like this that gets used every day. And the biggest expense is the sidearms and rebuilding these sidearms. And then when you keep things like 2013, you end up putting transmissions or engines in these vehicles. Sometimes that we've done them in-house, but a lot of times we have to send them out for those large repairs. So we will receive, in this 36-month lease, we will receive brand new stock in 18 months. So best estimate for us is all fluid changes and maybe a set of tires. So we're really looking forward to reducing our maintenance and our downtime. Currently, we have quite a few spare trucks that just have to be used every day because these other vehicles are constantly breaking down. So with that, I think what it's going to do not only is increase our efficiency every day, it will reduce that downtime. When trucks are broke down, we have to add routes are delayed till later in the day, till another route is completed, and then that turns into overtime for those drivers. So it will help us in our motor equipment also with these large repairs. Those trucks are in there for weeks where they're not getting to the minor repairs on some of these other vehicles. And this time of year, it's always difficult if you have a piece of snow and ice equipment down or you're gonna work on the Packer. Obviously, the Packers are probably number one, unless we're in a snowstorm, because we pick the trash up every day, as you know. So with that, I will gladly take any questions, but I gotta give our credit to our Public Works Department and Finance Department. We've went through, this has been months and months. We've looked at this analysis on what was spent on equipment for the last 10 years. And we look conservatively, we're gonna save money every year by doing this lease.
Thank you, Chris. Committee members, any questions for Chris Luddle? All right. Any other council members? All right, I don't see any. Chris, is suspension of the rules okay, or you want consent agenda?
You know, there again, law has worked on this. We're ready to go. So, I mean, if we could suspend the rules. One other thing I'd like to add real quick though, sir. You know, we rent vehicles every year for leaf season. We rent Packers to pick up our leaves. The 4 that we are keeping, the 4 2024, we're going to keep those, and street cleaning will use those We also use those for large debris. I mean, I don't hope we don't have another August 8th storm, but those are the kind of things we're going to keep those 4 new trucks for, and it will actually save street cleaning $100,000 a year in rentals for the 2025 season. So I just wanted to throw that in there, so thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Well, no questions or comments. Committee, Chris is looking for suspension of the rules.
So, second.
Thank you. I have a motion, and a second for suspension of the rules. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, committee. And that's all we have for us today. So we are adjourned.
Our next committee today will be the Public Safety Committee, and it will begin at 2:15. Those committee members are McKittrick, Kamer, Lombardo, Hannah, and Davis. Again, that's the Public Safety Committee, and it will begin at 2:15. Thank you. Okay, it's 2:15, and our next committee of the day is the Public Safety Committee. Those committee members are McKittrick, Kamer, Lombardo, Hannah, and Davis. Do have all committee members present. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Clerk Viviano. We have some previous minutes to approve. If I could get a motion and a second?
Motion to accept.
And I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we have two old pieces, one of which I'm going to ask for a time on to continue, but we have the one piece that the administration has asked to be able to come in and present some more on and have some questions asked in regard to it. It's the ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a contract or contracts without publicly advertising for bids with Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton Garrison LLP for the provision of comprehensive use of force community engagement assessment for the Akron Police Department declaring an emergency. Who will be presenting today from the mayor's office? Mary, are you starting off? Yes. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Madam President, and council members.
Good afternoon.
Happy 2025. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and continue our discussion about the use of force review that we discussed back in December. I think in the intervening weeks, we have taken some time and continued some of the discussion and listened to some of the questions and places where folks asked for more information. And so what we are providing today is a document called Frequently Asked Questions document, covering some of the areas that we've heard most where folks would like some more information. I think I appreciate the opportunity to continue to discuss this, and at this time would turn it over to Public Safety Strategist Tony Ingram to talk a little bit further.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Chair. I just want to spend just a few minutes just really digging a little deeper into the why of policy review. Policy review is not something that really is foreign to me. It's a lot that we did while I worked with the court. Through specialized dockets, we regularly reviewed the policies and procedures related to how we implement, how we are following best practice, and how we can continue to improve and get the necessary outcomes that we were looking for. So I come into this process looking at it as something positive, an opportunity for us to assess where we are in terms of best practice, assess where we are in terms of making sure we're getting the outcomes that we seek. The other piece that was really exciting for me was the opportunity to engage with community, and not just engage with community, but also using a model, a best practice model that is out there called procedural justice, that I will get some additional information to this committee in reference to specifically what that involves. But it is really a way for community to be heard. It's something that we used in the court system. Oftentimes for the people who were under supervision with us on probation, felt we as officers were in an adversarial position with them. And so we took the opportunity to hear from them and to learn that fairness in the process was instrumental in terms of having positive outcomes. And so that's a little piece of what procedural justice and procedural fairness is about. And so it's a unique and exciting opportunity, I believe, to help bridge some of the divide between community and police. So the folks who are doing this work have great reputations, have been doing this work across the country. So again, I'm excited for that process. Chief and I have talked a little bit in reference to his thoughts, and I'll let him share those at this time.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chair, Madam President. Again, in support of this legislation, as I was before, I think it's vital that we continue to learn what the community expectations for the police are, specifically when it comes to use of force. And it's just as vital for us as an education piece to have an opportunity to kind of share how complex and challenging those issues are in our police officers each and every day. So looking for best practices, if there's additional training or things that come out of here, I think it's imperative that we implement those. To me, this is not an indictment against the police department to say we're doing anything wrong. I think it's more of an opportunity to continue to learn and educate. We've started that through Citizens Police Academies throughout the year, and to me, the outreach, the community involvement here is really critical, and one of the main important pieces I think is extremely important. We work and get our authority from the people we serve every day, and I think it's important that we hear from them and they get an opportunity to also hear from us and our officers. I love the community engagement that's built into this. I also like the listening sessions and the learning sessions with our police auditor's office and with our officers and the union. I think those are really vital to what we're doing here. I think it's really important that we do this. Unfortunately, these are the type of incidents that cause the most grief and reaction from our community. And like I said, I think it's important that we hear from them and we look for any other available best practices that may exist. But then after those, like the mayor mentioned before, it's vital that we then take the time and resources to implement anything that comes out of these recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Tony. And just a few other things. I know one of the things I just want to kind of reiterate is, why we see this as such a priority. Obviously, we all know there have been several incidents, including, 2 fatal incidents in the last year of use of force that have caused pain in our community. And this is also with our new police auditor's office, an area that as he's doing specific reviews of specific incidents, that he has asked us to look into reviewing and revising the policy specifically around use of force. While we have done reports on racial equity, we have done reports on policing generally, we have never in this community done a report specifically on use of force, a deep dive into use of force. And so that is what this is. We have talked about before the significant spending on settlements, and that's something that is an unsustainable trend. We also have talked about how our officers are encountering more people illegally carrying weapons than they were just a few years ago. And so that, I think, raises the possibility of force, and also calls on us to address how encounters like those should be handled, especially when they are occurring more frequently. To Tony's point, the relationship with the community and really having that community engagement and dialogue and listening is critical. I think one thing that I've heard, Councilman Fusco, you mentioned this morning, is that we don't want to prejudge the situation, right? And so we want to go in a way and set up a framework and engagement in which everyone feels like they have the opportunity to share their perspective, to share their truth. And so then we can have a really difficult, frankly, community discussion about what we want to see, how we want our officers to engage in these kinds of encounters. And I think that in doing so, that this will represent systemic change, a deep dive into policy, practices, and culture, and will allow us then to work on the implementation. I think building on some work we're already doing, but hopefully taking a much deeper approach to it. Obviously, we know that one of the concerns is the cost of the review, and this is understandable. I think, obviously, we've talked about how critical of an issue this is that these are issues that are really matters of life and death and deserve to be a priority, especially when they are the focus and the request of our police auditor, when they are things that we are hearing from our community. We also have researched other communities and found that there is a range of costs that reviews like this can take, and that we feel like this is within the realm of what communities are paying. We have some information here. We're working to continue to provide more information on the costs in other communities over this coming week. And then finally, we need to have the best team that we can possibly have, right? Sometimes when we're entering into contracts in this council, we talk about lowest and best. And while we certainly want to make sure that we're being thoughtful with our city funds, as we're going to talk about this afternoon with the capital budget, we also, especially with a thorny issue that often is divisive, that there's no panacea or easy fix to, that we deserve in this community to have the strongest possible team of independent experts looking at this. And I believe that's what we have assembled to work alongside our community in this. And then finally, when we look at what the review will include, we've talked about the engagement with law enforcement, the engagement with the community. But it will not just focus on use of force, but also on community interactions with the police, on community perceptions of safety. And so in some ways will be perhaps a little bit more broader than we've talked about, than simply focused on use of force, although that will be the primary focus. And again, as I said before, we don't want to prejudge what will come of this, right? But there are lots of possible recommendations. We've also provided a document that summarizes several pages of the previous engagements from 21 Century Solutions and also Paul Wise. And in that, they talk about some of the recommended proposals for other communities. I think we will continue to dive into how the implementation is going in this community, in those communities. One of the things we've heard from members of council is that we want to hear not just what the outputs are, but what the outcomes are. And so I think we're going to continue that dialogue and that discussion. And then finally, I would say that whatever the recommendations are, this administration is fully committed to implementing them. And so where there are rule or policy updates, those are things that I think can be done in relatively short order. Where if there are recommended changes to training, those are things that certainly we will need to work together on funding, but I think are also things we can accomplish together. And if there are broader things that require partnership with changing the charter or changing the union contract, obviously we will work through those, but I think this administration is fully committed to implementing what we get and setting out a timetable by which residents can follow along in that work and hold us accountable for that. Like I said before, I think this will be complementary to the work that has been done over the course of this past year, but will allow us to go even further. And one thing that has been discussed is as we continue to look at structure and personnel and staffing, and one thing that the council president has mentioned, as we go forward, we are looking at creating a role similar to the former public safety director role that would help manage police department and fire department. We think it is very critical that, as we've done, bringing the police chief and the fire chief into the cabinet, but also that is important to have even more capacity and support as we work to navigate the really challenging situations that we're facing when it comes to safety. So we view this work not as the entirety of the challenge or the entirety of the problem. On the last page of the FAQ, we talk about how there's much broader work that needs to be done in addressing gun violence, in addressing opportunities for our youth, but we see this as the best approach to this specific issue when it comes to use of force. Thank you for bearing with us during that presentation, and very much look forward to taking your questions, and not asking that we have a vote today, but that we continue the dialogue and discussion, and in the hopes of moving forward in partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Mr. Ingram. I'd like to start with, Madam President, did you have anything? Okay. Any committee members that have questions or comments? Mr. Hanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got some questions that I think you should answer. What happens if the BCI give a report that the officer that shot and killed the last young man in Akron, what if they say that this officer wasn't at fault? What happens if it goes to the grand jury and the grand jury says that there's no fault, that the officer was not at fault? And will the police department take the recommendation of this outside review committee, or would they say, well, the grand jury and the BCI have both spoken, so we can continue to do what we've been doing in the past? I live in a house, and everyone in here lives in a house. And what happens is when your house gets dirty, you know that, and you try to clean that house up. You don't need anyone to come in your house and tell you what you need to do. You can have just a on the surface cleaning or a deep cleaning. This needs a deep cleaning. We've been through this 2 times that I can remember, that you brought in and you did studies and nothing has changed. And what makes you think that it's going to be a change if you spend this kind of money to bring in an outside organization? Because it just won't change. And especially if the BCI give a report that the officer was in his right to shoot the young man. And so I have too many issues in my ward, like homelessness, like too many houses still standing, and I've been on council for a year, and those houses are still standing in my ward. And so there are just too many issues in my ward for me to say that council should expend an expenditure of this amount of money and bring somebody else in our house to clean up our house. We know what's wrong in our house, don't we? The mayor knows, the chief of police knows. We know what's wrong with our house. We know what's wrong. We know what's wrong with the crime. We know what's wrong with the police department. There's no de-escalation when it comes to working with our youth, even if they have guns on them. You know, there should be a possibility that something should be said to our youth, or come back into the community and have an outreach approach to our young black males. And those are the ones that's getting killed. So with that being said, I'm a little comprehensive about going forward with this request. Thank you so much.
Councilman Hanna, if I could, just a couple things. I think that, first of all, when it comes to the shooting death of Jasmine Tucker, I think that as the BCI process and the grand jury process play out, they will go through that investigation, and there has been information that has been shared. There will be other facts that the investigation will review, and then that process will move forward. There will, as we've discussed previously, be an internal investigation process that will also look at whether what occurred violated our policies, both when it comes to the body camera usage, the shooting itself, and the rendering of aid. I think that stepping back from this, what this deep dive review is intended to do is to ask ourselves whether that policy is what our community wants to see. Because we have seen several instances so far this past year, in which a number of people in our community have had significant concerns with uses of force, and use of force that has been adjudged to be within the policy, right? And so that raises the question of whether there should be a change to the policy. That's not just a question that I have, that I've shared, but also a question that our police auditor has shared. Now, I take your point that when we know we have a challenge to face, we have to face it. I agree with that. But I don't think that it means we have to face it alone. And I believe that there is value to having independent experts. One, because I think they bring credibility, that I'm not a use of force expert personally. I'm not a policing expert personally. And we are bringing in some of the most reputable experts from around the country. But also that we need to do this as a community, not just have Shamus's ideas for what policing needs to look like in the community, but to have really a community perspective on what policing looks like in our community. Because I would submit to this council that too often we have multiple different ideas in our community about what policing should look like, right? And I think we need to have a conversation about having a community perspective about how we want police to engage, because often there is a gap there. The last thing I would say is two more things. You mentioned reports that I think that I've brought forward, or proposals that I've brought forward. I'm not aware of what you're discussing there. There have been previous reports, the 2021 Council Reimagining Public Safety report, that we have been working to implement together. Issue 10 and the Auditor's Office was part of that. And as well as the PERF report and the Racial Equity Social Justice report. And some of what has been implemented from those reports is in those documents. And I'm not saying that anyone has done a perfect job of implementing those reports, but I don't think that means we stop doing reviews and we stop looking at what changes need to be made. And the last thing is, I really do believe that we can do multiple things at once, right? I believe this is an issue that we have to break the cycle that we have been stuck in as a community, where we see tragedies and things move along, and then we see another tragedy and things move along, that we have to break that cycle. But I also believe we can do things like we're going to do in an hour, talk about the capital budget, and talk about, you're right, there are too many buildings in your ward that need to be torn down. And that's why, after you've talked about it, we included Goodrich Middle School in the capital budget, because we hear you and because we are listening and we are in dialogue with you about it. We can do multiple things at once. We have to. We have challenges when it comes to resources and priorities, but I submit this is a priority.
Thanks, Mr. Hanna. Thanks, Mayor. Councilwoman Jan Davis.
Councilwoman Davis, I'm going to send you a prompt. It should show up on your screen asking you to unmute.
Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right, I am still in support of the consulting agency coming in, but I do have a question. Have we looked to any other agencies?
Tony, do you want to kind of walk through the entities that you had conversations with and kind of how that process unfolded?
Sure. So, Councilwoman, I spoke with 4 different entities, really around specifically the policy review piece. So I had an opportunity to speak with representatives from the Department of Justice, their COPS office. Mr. Fomby, who's doing our crowd management, is also someone who's done use of force review previously. I talked with Attorney Thompson, who was a recommendation from the police auditor, as well as I spoke to representatives from 21CP. And in that, All of those entities at some particular point had either worked with, worked alongside, or worked with people who had been a part of 21CP. So from that perspective, they really seem to be the leaders in doing the policy review piece. And so that's really where my conversation with those particular entities in review happened with those 4 groups.
Okay, and I do understand the concern around the costs, but I've taken a deep dive into it as much as I could, and I've looked at the profiles for the individuals that are with 21CP, and in just my opinion, it's unmatched to anything we've had previously. And I just have to say that I look at it from this perspective. My analogy would be, as a young girl, when I was married, I was having difficulty getting pregnant, okay? So my OBGYN sent me to here, there, and everywhere. We did tests. Nothing happened. So the next step was to send me to a specialist. And I have 2 kids, so we won't dive into that. And I just feel that these people are bringing to the table what we need at this point in time in Akron. So I'm in full support of this. I was just wondering if there was anything or another company that we had looked to. And Tony, you did answer that question for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilwoman. Councilman Lombardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This afternoon, I would just like to make some comments, of course, to our mayor and the administration with the title, Be Careful What You Wish For, okay, as we keep tightening and tightening the screws on our Akron police force. First, a few comments on some quotes from every time there's a situation in Akron, right? You watch the body cam footage and, it's disturbing, it's troubling. To me, those are strong pre-investigation words from watching a video because, I haven't seen a gunfight that was glamorous. I haven't seen a street fight that was pretty. As a numbers guy, I just want to talk about some statistics for a minute here, and some facts that I'm going to say are disturbing and troubling. In 2020, there were 12 retirements from our Akron police force and 5 resignations. In 21, 16 retirements and 10 resignations. You don't have to write this down, I'll sum it up in a minute. In 2022, 17 retirements and 16 resignations. In 2023, 17 retirements, 19 resignations. And in 24, 25 retirements and 22 resignations. Oh, and there's 12 retirements from what I hear pending in early 2025. So in 5 years, there's been 87 retirements and 72 resignations. Be careful what you wish for. So those numbers to me are disturbing because looking at the bigger picture for 196,000 residents, because, why is this? I mean, I can offer some suggestions. One being the Citizens Review Board, which I know the Akron residents did vote for. But the other suggestion is this upcoming legislation. To me, who wants to work in an organization where there are dozens of experts looking over your shoulder with every move you make? And did anybody get convicted of, dereliction of duty here? Nobody has. I know what I would do if I was constantly scrutinized while trying to perform my job to the best of my ability. I would say I'm out of here. Keep tightening the screws on me and sign me up for another city to police. Sign me up for increased salary too. Because, the 72 officers that resigned, were they under that mindset? I don't know, but Akron pays $76,500 for an officer. Dayton, $79,000. Cleveland, $84,000. Stowe, $85,000, and Columbus is $108,000 for an officer. Now, when it comes to the retirements, you got to wonder if those retirements were actually, from, retirement age retirements, right? Or were they retirements from, I'm close enough and I can't take it anymore. So, many people will disagree on these recent officer-involved shootings, but we all should agree on communication is a two-way street. If we agree on that, why isn't accountability the same when it comes to police and citizens' engagement? I'm sorry, Mayor Malik. I just think that the finger is pointed at the wrong direction. I'm sorry. I know that you've seen the videos and commented on the videos, and again, they're disturbing, but none of this is necessary if there's compliance with the law, even with certain rules. Again, I'm sorry, with the fight at your high school even, compliance keeps everyone safe. Communication and accountability between two parties is the key, and that advice is free. I don't think there's any need to spend, $750,000, but, trust me, I'm a former youth basketball coach, football coach, baseball coach. Sign me up to mentor the youth and the leaders of tomorrow. I certainly would be the last person on this earth who would want to cause any child harm. And it gives me great heart failure to see a former basketball player of mine, Keon DeGreat, who was shot and killed right on his home turf at Patterson Park. And you can go on to, between Jalen Walker and Jasmine Tucker, Ward 2 residents, Ward 2 turf, I'm so sorry for their loss at a very young age, but those are just some of the thoughts that I have running through my mind. To my fellow colleagues here, your vote on this is your choice. Whether it's yes or no, rest assured I will still continue to walk with you, talk with you, and and it's a safe bet to say that I'll be there to work with you, as we try to work through every day and every week to keep moving this city forward. But I just ask you to keep these facts in mind and be careful what you wish for. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. President Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, and I know we talked a little bit about this earlier today. And Mr. Ingram, I do appreciate you saying that you've had conversations with other firms, but as a person who is elected to a community that probably has the most impact with police, I want to make sure, as Mayor Malik has said, that we get the best firm to do this work. And you just saying you had conversations with other people and not being able to give this body information in which we can compare to make sure that we have the best proposal in front of me is concerning. So I see that you mentioned you have reached out to Spencer Fomby. I'm unfamiliar with that firm, what they provide, or anything. You said Department of Justice. Again, we don't know exactly what those conversations were, what questions were asked, what scope of work, or what their abilities are there. We don't know price tags of what these other firms will charge. Those are the things that my constituents particularly would like to know. I did have an opportunity to reach out to one of the individuals that you had a conversation with, which is Marcia Thompson. Again, a person of her caliber and experience, the lead investigator on Breonna Taylor, working on Freddie Gray and many other high-profile cases, and the fact that she was never even asked for a proposal, that leads me to question why. Because again, if we want to make sure that we are getting the best in this space, I think that we need to seek out proposals to ensure that that is what we are getting. And so I guess the question is, why did we not move past conversations with Spencer Fomby, Marcia Thompson, or even the Department of Justice to actually get formal proposals so this body could actually make the best decision and we could be as transparent as possible with the community.
Do you want to start? And then I.
Sure. Madam President, I can start by just simply saying my task was just simply to get that information. It wasn't to inquire in reference to cost. It wasn't to request any specific proposal for anyone. It was really more information gathering on my end, which I think I did, and not just in conversation with those individuals, but also researching some of the different proposals that I saw out there in terms of some of the work that some of those folks had done in other cities, including Louisville, including Fort Worth, Texas, including Arlington, Virginia, and use just some of that information just to come up with what my thoughts were. But to those specific questions around dollars, that wasn't specifically what my task was or what I was asked to do.
Tony, could you speak to particularly the conversation with Ms. Thompson and kind of, your thought, evaluating whether to move forward or not?
Sure. It wasn't a matter of credentials. Obviously, the work that she's done, she's been extremely involved. As we were having that conversation, that was work that she was not immediately involved in. She was much more in the academic space, had indicated that she was looking to get back into that space. And at the time, just immediacy of what I was asked for, what just wasn't sure or wasn't quite clear that in terms of a time frame that she would be able to meet that.
Yeah, and so this is, and if I can, just before, Mayor, just honestly, because it is troubling, and the more that we talk about it, the more troubling it really kind of becomes, because I had a conversation with her too, and for 2 years, she's been out of this space. But again, when she sat down with you, she was never even given the scope of work. What is it that the city is looking to do in terms of, is it just a simple review of use of force? So again, we're going down a kind of a dangerous road here in saying that we've selected the best person when we're not asking all the firms the same exact questions. And that is what is concerning. Mayor?
Sure. I think that, let me first speak to the other entities that Mr. Ingram mentioned. First of all, Mr. Fomby is currently working with us to review our crowd management policies and practices per the settlement that was entered into with the Akron Bail Fund, referenced the incident that occurred on Copley Road in which chemical spray was used. As part of that, we had discussions with him, and I think it's fair to say that we wanted him to focus on that work, and we want those two pieces of work to continue moving simultaneously. With regard to the Department of Justice COPS office, this is the office, the Community-Oriented Policing Service office, that can come in and do use of force reviews. They did a use of force review recently in the city of Columbus, Ohio, and we reviewed that document that they did. They did that in partnership with they subcontract 2 firms, and the firm that they used was Jensen Hughes, who we also reached out to and didn't hear a response from, but that we reviewed the Columbus work, and part of the concern that we had was that you have to go through a process by which you request the support from DOJ, and they can grant it or not, and then they often, similar to as we've discussed with the consent decree process, may decide which issues or topics to focus on and which not to, and kind of on their timeline, which again, we wanted to be very focused on use of force. And so that's why we didn't go in that direction with the Department of Justice, Cops Officer Jensen Hughes. I think with regard to Ms. Thompson, I think that, this was as part of our discussions with Mr. Fennell and Mr. Boyd with the Oversight Board and the Auditor's Office, we were proactively talking to him about what we thought this review might look like and trying to get ideas and engagement. And as part of that, he suggested that we have a conversation with Ms. Thompson. And, I believe that it was a robust and thoughtful conversation that Mr. Ingram had with Ms. Thompson. I believe that part of the concern also was that she's currently in academia, and so the timeline to actually put together a team and move forward in that way would likely be longer. Now, I think that it's fair to say that no process is perfect, and I think that we've discussed this several times over the past week. I think that it's fair to say that we could have had more follow-up to say, hey, in the context of where we're looking and the timeline that we're looking at, we've decided to go in a different direction. And certainly I think that's fair. But I do believe that we have had a robust search to look at the field of organizations that provide this kind of service. And I believe that when we're talking about one individual versus a law firm and a policing firm that has done this level of work, that we have a really exceptional and experienced team here, and that doesn't preclude us from, potentially being involved with Ms. Thompson in the future. But that for the need that we have right now, we felt this was the correct approach.
Thank you. And just for the record, Marcia Thompson does have a contract with the city of Chicago. Okay, just so you know. So she is not just in academia a professor. So I just want to make sure that information is accurate for the record.
Thanks, Madam President. Well, I was going to go with Councilwoman Amobian, but she is not in the frame at the moment, so I will go with Councilman Garrett.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. I look back at a kid in school, and that kid does something wrong, and then they have to go to detention. And then you're in detention, and then folks walk in detention. It's like, man, why are they being mean to these kids in detention? Why these kids can't go out on recess? This police department has caused our city tons of money. That's why we have an oversight board. That's why we have funding for the oversight. It's frustrating to watch this one agency hit our taxpayers so hard. I mean, part of our job is our responsibility to our citizens in watching their tax dollars. We're talking about spending tons of money. $768,000 that I know that I have 2 residents that I've discussed in Ward 7 that could use money for housing, that could use money for bills, that could use some money to help them out. Instead, we're deciding to go this route with spending our taxpayers' money this way. One of the things that troubled me is I was listening to the Ohio channel, and at the 27th minute during this one episode, they talked about spending money and how the consent decrees and how these different bills would actually accumulate. And during that conversation, the gentleman said, well, one of the reasons that it's so costly, to my colleague Lombardo's point, is that the officers or the departments aren't cooperating or complying. So we're getting ready to go down this path, and we're going to get this organization. They're going to come out and they're going to make these huge suggestions. Who's going to make sure that they cooperate and comply? Because these attorneys aren't just going to do this for free. And so as they're waiting for documents or they're making these additional requests, one of the things I read in an oversight opinion is that they're being slow walked on a lot of the requests that they get. And so my question or concern is, if the APD is so for this, why isn't it coming out of their budget? What money are they donating to it? The FOPs for it, what money are they putting toward it? Because part of me and part of my constituents just seem to think that this is just going to be another red herring, a way to take money out of their community, out of their mouths, out of helping them, and giving it to an organization that's just going to go out, do another study, and to Councilman Hannah's point, you know your TV's dirty, you wipe your TV off. Why do we have a police chief if he can't make his officers comply, cooperate, do what's necessary? I think it's really important that we really watch the taxpayers' money here. If there's other organizations that can be vetted to do the job, it's almost like one of the reasons we have the EDGE and MBE program. We're going to keep giving the money to the big company. CP3, take this money. Harvard, take this money. When we can find other companies, to Ms. Madam President's point, that can do the same exact work, and we can save the taxpayers some money. I mean, we don't need to get the most expensive, because at the end of the day, back to the Ohio channel, if officers were just to cooperate and comply, because that's what we ask these little black boys to do, these little white boys in poor communities to do, comply with the officers. How about if the police officers would comply with some of their own policies right now? We don't need somebody to tell us not to punch the kid in the head 11 times. We don't need somebody to tell us not to knee this person in the face 14 times. But more importantly, when they do that, and then it goes for a review out of a captain or lieutenant, they find them not at fault. And so we're getting ready to go through this and spend all our taxpayers' money for I wish there was something tangible we know that we can grab, something I could take back to my constituents and say, this was a good investment. Cooperate and comply. Mayor, you have the power to make these people cooperate and comply right now. They're not listening.
Councilman.
I'm not finished. I'm sorry.
Sure.
It's just concerning that when a kid is in detention, the rules are tightened and folks are frustrated because the rules are tightened. They're tightened for a reason. And our taxpayers are tired of paying this money. This administration is getting ready to rack up the highest cost in our city's history, in lawsuits. The highest cost ever. And how are we going to take that back to our taxpayers? What am I supposed to tell them? We're getting ready to settle out with a 15-year-old kid who was shot in the back, who never brandished a weapon. What's going to be the price tag on that? Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple of thoughts, but before I do that, Councilman, you said Harvard take this money. What, can I ask you just to clarify what you meant by that?
I'll clarify. Madam President spoke about several different companies that could save our taxpayers a lot of money. Instead, we went with a higher company. That's what I mean by that.
Okay, but I just want to clarify, because you've insinuated a couple times that there's some Harvard connection or personal connection that I have to this, and I've said a couple times that that there's no connection, that Paul Wise was not identified by any personal connection that I have, and the only familiarity I have with the folks on the team is having, on the Paul Wise team, is having spoke to them on Zoom since they were identified by this administration, not by me. And so, I think that with the seriousness of the things that we're talking about, like, we should talk about them. We should have debates about them. but the insinuations and the allegations and the rumors don't help. And I think you know that. I said that in the frequently asked questions. I said that on your Facebook page when you exposed my Harvard connections. I just want to clarify that. Now, you talk about this administration racking up settlements. You know, I believe, that these are settlements of incidents that occurred before this administration took office. We have a duty to the taxpayers, and those settlements occurred on the advice of counsel. You know, if the solution were so easy, if it were as easy as wipe your TV off, I think we could do that. I think we wouldn't be stuck in this same cycle that we've been stuck in while I've worked for the city. That if you go to some of these reports that we've been stuck in for long before any of us were alive. It is more complicated than that. And I don't disagree with you that there are very real questions about how implementation will work, and that it will take a lot of will. It will take will from me. It will take will from the people around this horseshoe, that it will take will from the folks who work in the Stubbs Justice Center, that will take will from people all across our community. But does that mean we shouldn't try? Does that mean that we should actually not do what our auditor has asked, which is to do a deep dive into use of force? I don't think so.
Chief.
Thank you. Two things were mentioned here today that I think is important that I address. One was there was a mention about us possibly slow walking investigations. I completely and totally take offense to that comment. That's quite false. We have never been quicker getting our use of force and complaint investigation to the auditor's office. If we talk about body-worn camera video, I think it's important that everybody understands we're up almost 200% in body-worn camera requests. Last year alone, we processed over 15,000 videos, up from the year before when it was 6,000 videos. We processed almost 400,000 minutes of video. We have 3 people full-time, that's all they do, and they can't keep up. So when we talk about slow walking, I take offense to that, one. Number 2, there was a conversation around de-escalation. I think it's important to understand that all our officers have been trained in that, and they practice it every day. We have a use of force in less than 0.25% of all calls for service that our officers go to. Can we do better? Absolutely. Do we think we continue to need to work together? Absolutely. But I know those 2 things were mentioned today, and I think that's important that I provide some facts and clarity on that so the record is straight on where those are. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Councilwoman Amobian, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I lowered my hand, but then I was about to raise it again. Thank you for recognizing me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Basically, when I listened to Mr. Ingram talk about the entities that he reached out to, I also heard him say that those entities, it sounded like, if I'm not speaking this correctly, Mr. Ingram, please correct me. It sounded like some of those entities look to the 21 CP group for consultation, additional help, or whatever the case may be. I believe that we could probably look to a range of firms and groups and probably find something that is superior, good, whatever, in each one. And each one could have their own expertise. I am really concerned about the fact that we keep having these episodes. I am concerned that we need to move forward with this review. I know I've spoken with Mr. Fennell a number of times about his request that we review our use of force policy. I'm deeply troubled by these recent killings. And again, I believe that issue 10, I believe this review that we're talking about, all of these things are really designed to look at not only the police force, but the citizens' interaction. And I think we've been very clear. We want everybody to go home safely, and we want to do what's going to be helpful to both the police side as well as the citizen side when we review things. I don't think we get better, folks, unless we take a look at ourselves to see what is it about our practices and performances that we need to either change, improve, or do something differently. I don't want to point a finger at anybody. All I know is that we have citizens who are killed, and I, for one, keep asking the question, why did this happen? And I have said repeatedly, if it involves training, let's provide the best training we can provide. If it means that we need to review our policies and how we do things, let's have some policies that we can hold everybody accountable to. And we don't have to look to, folks thinking that we are, pointing fingers to police officers. I can only tell you that in every discipline that I'm aware of, everybody is coming up with clear, qualitative standards that they're trying to hold their staff accountable to. I've worked in mental health for years, and if you know anything about behavioral health, it is constantly changing, constantly. And as a result of that, people leave, people go back to school to get more training. They review staff more to see, are you performing to the standards that we've established? Are we getting the kind of outcomes that we want to get? And for whatever reason, all of these professions are looking at themselves and saying, okay, we need to do something better, different, or whatever the case may be. Some people choose to leave, some people choose to go back to school, some people choose to do a number of things. And some people retire, like I just did. But I retired because, 71 years old, I've worked almost 40 years at one agency, and, it's just a number of things. But I think it's high time for us to look at the use of force practice in our system and see what else we can do. Because I want to help police officers, and I said it before. I cannot believe that an officer who engages in killing someone, particularly a 15-year-old child, who may have had a loaded gun on him, but there was no way for anybody to know it until they unzipped his pocket and found the gun. So I can't believe that an officer can go to bed and sleep well, knowing that he's taken a life. And likewise, my grief for the family that lost the child as well. So for me, I'm not concerned as much about the dollar because I cannot put a dollar on a life. I cannot. And as Amir indicated, these payouts that we are paying out, we're paid out for Jalen Walker's situation, which happened before this administration. And some of these other things are happening as a result of that. The rallies that they had and took people in, and for whatever reason, they found that they violated their rights as well. So I can only tell you that I am on board with reviewing our use of force, and I do not have time or the expertise to go and look at all these different organizations and compare them. I would look to the administration and the staff to do that. And it sounds like they did some of that. Now, whether we're satisfied with the comprehensiveness of their review, if there are some other things that we can look at and check and see if there's anybody that's comparable. It doesn't sound like it to me based on what I've heard. It sounds like we have a very comprehensive group that's willing to work together and that they're asking us to work with them, and they will work with the citizens of Akron to get their input as well. I can only tell you I'm on board. I want to move forward with a review so we can move forward with putting something in place so that we as a community can stop some of these killings. They are heartbreaking, and you can't bring these children back. Thank you very much. And again, I'm on board with passing this. And I'm not sure what the mayor is thinking of or the administration in terms of how soon you want or need to do this. I would imagine, now that we're not worried about the opera part, that I'm not sure how much time you're talking about, the first quarter of this year, or are we looking at a date, or do we have to give the company a time frame? Thank you very much.
Councilwoman, thank you very much for your comments. And I think my hope is that, if this council would be willing to vote on the proposal next Monday, and, as you review this frequently asked questions, if there are further questions or things that you would like us to look into and be able to share, we certainly would like to do that, and appreciate the time today to have discussion and debate about it. But really believe that this is something that, can help move our city forward.
Councilwoman Boyd.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So implementation was mentioned. Many folks may not realize this, but there's currently a negotiation going on with regard to the police contract. How does the timing of this match with that in terms of implementation?
Sure. So as Councilman Boyes, as you mentioned, there is current negotiations with the police union as well as the fire union. We don't have a timetable for when there will be an agreement. I think what I would say is that if there are changes to the rules or policy, those would not necessarily need the approval, those would not necessarily need there to be changes in the union contract to agree to, right? If there were suggestions that did require changes to the union contract, that could require us to seek to reopen the union contract and renegotiate those things with the union. That would be, we cannot force someone to agree to changes, right? Even a charter amendment cannot trump a contract, right? And so in some ways, what is currently in the contract and has been negotiated into the contract over decades, requires negotiations to be changed. And as we've talked about, we have certain financial capacity to bargain with and negotiate with. I'm not going to negotiate or bargain here at the council floor. But what I would say is, again, we will have to move forward as a community. And so that is part of the value of having the police union at the table with these discussions, right? To understand their perspective and rationale as part of this, just as we have sought to have the auditor's office and oversight board at the table for these discussions, and also have it be an entirety of community effort. Because again, I don't look at this as things that, will take 1 year and then we'll be done, right? That this is a multi-year, long-term process that we are embarking upon as a community to continue to try to get better as a department and as a city. And so I think, like I said, I think we'll be able to tier it and have things that we can do immediately. And there could be things, and again, without prejudging what the recommendations are, things that take longer. But certainly it is my intent from our administration to do everything we possibly can to implement where recommendations come.
Thank you. I was thinking more so, a lot of questions about, a particular officer and can this officer be fired? That's dictated by the contract, right? So discipline is dictated by the contract, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the contract requires that there be cause for any discipline and lays out a process for discipline that involves pre-disciplinary hearing, notice of charges, and opportunities for appeal. And so when we talk about any specific incidents that have occurred, that process, is the process that's in effect. As we know, we have a criminal investigation that happens through BCI in the state, and then will allow us to have an internal investigation after that. And the other point I just want to make briefly is that part of the value that I see in this review is to have discussions about use of force that are separate from any one specific incident, because often we talk about use of force in the context of a specific tragedy that is deeply painful, that often we don't necessarily have we have some information about, but we don't necessarily have all the information about, and which also we cannot go back and change and undo. And I think that those concerns and questions about accountability are important and are critical. But I think separately, we also need to have a discussion about kind of conceptually how we want our officers to engage with our citizens.
I think my question, and I shouldn't have brought up a specific, but I, just for giving it relevance, is there a situation where this particular process we go through and the recommendations could be in opposition to whatever is in the contract? Could the contract somehow make it harder to implement some of the things that's why I asked about the timing, I guess.
Yeah, so for instance, right, and I say if because I, again, don't want to suggest, we haven't even hired these folks yet, I don't want to suggest what they're going to come in and hear, let alone what they're going to come in and suggest. But if they were to suggest that, you need to have investigations take place through the Oversight Board and Auditor's Office, or discipline happen through the Oversight Board and Auditor's Office, that would have to be negotiated into a contract, right? Now, I would guess that even if that is a recommendation, that's not the only recommendation that they will have, right? And I'm not saying that would be their recommendation, right? But there are recommendations that could require changing the contract.
Okay. Councilman Fusco.
I'm sorry. I'll try to be brief. I know the hour's late. I appreciate the discourse here. I appreciate the sincerity inside everyone's voices. The comments Mr. Lombardo made, the comments that Eric Garrett made, the comments and everyone. And this is something, and Mayor, I know that we're wanting to get this moving, and I think we all do, but I think the gravity of the situation lends itself to us debating this and taking our time and going intentionally and learning as much as we can, because I think and I'm struck by what Mr. Ingram opened up with, and I'm still wrestling with, and that is, what are the outcomes you seek? I believe, I don't know if I quoted you exactly or not, but I believe that's what it was. And I think we're all asking ourselves that question. At least I know I am still. What are the outcomes that we seek? And I think that perhaps if we can all develop a mission statement, whereas we can all kind of agree, this is what we want to see. This is the what, this is the how. We're going to get there, because I think we all agree that we want to see a safe Akron for everyone, for young black children, for young white children, older, everyone alike. And I think these last 10 years, with the increase with the illegal guns, and of course that's just a side of this whole thing. And I also believe that the trust piece, and that's why it's so important that everyone, there's trust that's built, and it's got to be built. And I think what you were mentioning, Mr. Garrett, in terms of the trust piece, I don't believe that every officer in the city of Akron would look at this and say, I'm not participating, I'm not going to be part of this. As I mentioned before, I've been through this before with the Public Utilities Bureau a number of years ago, but what we did was we started from the bottom and we worked our way up. We went to the I don't want to say the lowest employee within the city in the public utility, but to the folks that were out there in the trenches doing the hard work. We started with them, and we talked with them, and we built that trust, and it was through the leadership of the organization, through the union. It was built over time, and it takes time to do that. How we get there is and that's what I'm saying, that's the mission statement I think perhaps we need to consider. It's like, that's important to, I think, all of us, because I think we want to see this, those of us who are in support, but I think at the end of the day, we all have that same goal in mind. And so I think the trust is going to be so vital, and talking this through intentionally like we have this afternoon, this is one of the better conversations we've had, because I think we all, at the end of the day, want everyone to be safe. And so, thank you for the time.
Thanks, Councilman. And Councilman Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, President, the Mayor, and Police Chief. All of you be here. This is something that's been on my mind, obviously, since I came to this council, is the amount of murders, the amount of things that are going on, the use of force that we hear. And I've heard a couple things that are interesting to me. I've heard compliance on a couple different ways. I've heard compliance to the laws. I've heard compliance if the police would just comply. And I think in the general scope of things, that people do comply with the law and the police comply with what they do. It's the instances where they don't that we need to figure out how to handle this. And that's what we're trying to do. I am in favor of this. I look at this as a couple different ways, but we need to get this right. We've got to get it right. And getting it right isn't doing it on the cheap. It's not doing it by the people that we can find and trying to find the least expensive option here, or save a penny here, save $100,000 here. We need to get this right, because lives are on the line. They're on the line every day. They're on the line of our police officers. They're on the line of our residents. And we need to make sure we get this right, and we need to implement what comes out of this. Lastly, I think that I am certainly not an expert on this, and I know that, and I don't know if anyone on this council is an expert in this. And that's why we need to find an expert, and we need to find someone that we trust, as Mr. Fusco said, trust. That's a big issue, but what is trust when it comes to this? Trust to me is hope that this will work, but trust is hope with a track record. 21CP, from what I can tell, has a pretty darn good track record of doing this. The law firm, looking at some of the things here from what they have done and been involved in, that gives me not just hope, but gives me that track record that I see that I can bank on. I understand it's a lot of money, but lives are on the line, and there's going to be more lives on the line down the road, and it's going to continue if we don't find some way to deal with it. And I appreciate that we're looking at this. I appreciate that this legislation is brought to us, and I hope we can get something moving here sooner than later, because before something else happens again, this will happen again, but we need to have something in place that is going to work for this council and for the city.
Councilman Lombardo, briefly, because
I hear you.
we have some work coming forward here for the rest of the
Italian out of
afternoon.
me and
here.
try to be brief. How's that?
Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to know, like, if I was mayor, if I was police chief, okay, is there a chance that, hey, Mayor of Cincinnati, hey, Mayor of Columbus, we've got this situation. Can we get together and talk about this? Hey, Chief in Columbus, hey, Chief in Dayton, what do you guys, girls, see happening in your city? Can we get together and talk about this? Has that been discussed?
Yes. I spoke with the mayor of Columbus about their review and had a very helpful conversation. I've also spoken about this issue with a number of other mayors. I reached out actually Mayor Cranley, Mayor Cranley from Cincinnati about his involvement down in Cincinnati as well. And so I think, there's that's absolutely a practice that we need to do, and that's what I believe I've heard from Councilman Fusco and from Councilwoman Boyce, that again, we want to understand what are the expected outputs, but also what are some of the outcomes. And so I think looking at this document that we have from 21CP about the work in South Bend, the work in Baltimore, the work in Knoxville, looking at that, and I just spoke, actually, sorry, you reminded me, I also spoke with the mayor of Memphis just 2 weeks ago about this as well, and as they're navigating similar waters as well. Chief?
But again, let me just interrupt. It's not about reaching out to those other cities and, hey, what was the outcome of this law firm or whatever. I was talking about internally. Can you just sit down with the mayors, or you just sit down with the police chiefs, just internally? Because that's free, right? A meeting costs you a labor hour.
Yeah, and just so you know, I've done that myself, and the Cleveland chief have gotten together. We were actually in some training together. We talked about this. We talked about some of the process they went through as part of consent decree, some of the community engagement, community involvement as well. So we absolutely do that. I do that routinely, not just with her specifically, but also with some other chiefs as well. So we'll bounce ideas off each other, what works, what doesn't, what are they doing, what are some innovative training and techniques they're using as well. So yes.
Okay. If we have nothing else from any other council members, as the mayor said, he would like to see this be able to come to a vote next week. So I have the intention to continue with time with this. And if you have any questions at all, or anything comes to mind, either let me know or contact the mayor, the chief, Tony, any of the other members in the administration that are involved with this. But thanks so much for coming down today, and we'll be adjourned. Thank you.
That is our final committee meeting of the day. Capital Budget